All right, everybody, we are live for another Perceptive podcast developer interview here on Game Wisdom. Hopefully, everyone is having a great springish into summer season around here. But we are going to try and get to another cast with my voice and allergies all going out of whack. But my guest tonight is a returning one. He is developer of point-and-click adventure games like Lamplight City, A Golden Wake, and he just finished up the game Rosewater back in March. And he is on to discuss that and any other topics that come up. So, please welcome back to the podcast, Francisco. How are you doing?
Hello, I am well. How are you? Aside from allergic.
And all the horrors of getting old are all hitting you all at once here. But
yeah. Yeah.
Other than that, I have been busy. I'm sure you've been busy, or I guess like slightly less busy, as Rosewater was released last month.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, it's funny because Rosewater came out on March 27th, and then that was a Thursday, and then that following not 2 weeks later, I started doing some contract work. So I've been busy the last 3 weeks, and I still have a little bit more stuff to do. And then I'm going on vacation finally for the first time in like 6 years. In a couple of weeks, and then after that is when I will probably find myself finally not busy. So that'll be a weird feeling. But yes, yeah, that's how I've been.
And I know it's still a mysteries of a vacation around here for everything that I'm going to be doing. But it is great to have you back on. It's been a while since our last chat, and
yeah.
Before we get into things, for anyone watching us live, if you have any questions or any comments for Francisco, be sure to leave them and we'll get to them as they pop up. So, since it has been a while since our last shot, I think that was like right around, I think it was either like around Lamplight or maybe just around A Golden Wake was coming out. For people new...
Has it been that long?
I don't. It's been such a while. I'll have to check.
I feel like we've definitely talked at some point while I've been making Rosewater. It
could have been like early in the development.
Yeah. If not like one-on-one, I think we definitely chatted as part of like a round table or something. But I know I definitely. I mean, to be fair, I feel like I've been working on Rosewater for my entire life at this point. So who's to say? But anyway, yeah. Sorry, not to derail your question.
But yeah, according to my thing, the last time we chatted was in 2020, which feels like 27 years ago at this rate.
Yes. To be fair, I was working on Rosewater at that time, so yes, I was I wasn't too far off.
So, for people who missed that or are tuning in now, could you talk a little bit about kind of like who you are and what is your background?
Yeah, so my name is Francisco González, and as you said, I am a developer of point-and-click adventure games. I've been doing that since 2001. I started off doing it as a hobby. I use Adventure Game Studio, and I started doing that as a hobby in 2001. As I said, I basically did that just, in between just doing normal stuff, and then in 2013 I moved to New York and decided to do it full time, and I did. And my first commercial game was, as you mentioned, A Golden Wake, which came out in 2014, and then I did Shardlight in 2016, and I did Lamplight City in 2018, and I thought I was going to do Rosewater for 2021, but it took until 2025. And that's basically, I mean, my background is basically, I grew up playing the classic point-and-click adventure games. I got bitten by the creative bug. I always wanted to make them. And when I found Adventure Game Studio in 2001, that's kind of where I started and never really looked back. Always kind of dreamed of doing it professionally, but never really thought I would be able to. And I've been incredibly lucky to be able to do it for the past 11 years now. So, yeah. Yeah, that's me.
So, Golden Wake, that was your first adventure game? I think
that was my first commercially. Okay. Yeah, that was my first commercially released adventure game. I think the thing that I was probably most known for before, when I was doing freeware games, was a series called Ben Jordan Paranormal Investigator, which was an 8-part series about a paranormal investigator. And yeah, those were all free. They're all on itch now, and because those were made way back before there was Steam or anything else, or even itch for that matter. So it was just like you could download them from the AGS forums, and that was it. But yeah, that's what I spent the bulk of my time from 2004 to 2012 working on. Before that, I had done a couple of games. There was this community series called Reality on the Norm, where it was like shared assets, and you could just make your own backgrounds and characters and upload them to like the community resource page, and other people could use them. And I made a few games in that series from like 2001, 2002-ish, and then I decided I wanted to make something else, and that's when I started with Ben Jordan. So I was in college at the time, so I wasn't like fully dedicating myself either. So even though I made the first 3 Ben Jordan games in like less than a year, but yeah. So then when I decided to go commercial, yeah, Golden Wake was my first commercial project. So yeah, 4 games in 10 years, which not too bad.
Yep, and I know, I think from our last conversation, like, we talked a lot about, of course, Adventure Game Studio. I recently did another chat with, oh no, now I'm blanking on his name, from Wadget. I keep... Dave. Because there's another Dave who does it.
There's a lot of... Yeah, there's Dave from Powerhoof as well. I don't know if you've talked to him.
I don't
Who also does... He's working on an adventure game called The Drifter, and he's done other ones too. But yes.
I guess like every Dave does adventure games these days.
I guess so, yeah.
And hopefully, hopefully Dave's not watching this because I forgot his name. That would be perfect. But one thing I asked him about, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on as well. As you said, like, you've been using Adventure Game Studio now for almost 20 years, and I just want to, like, for people like listening to us who may not use the program or anything like that, I guess, how is Adventure Game Studio these days? Is it still, like, I guess, like, being updated? Like, is it still, like, any, like, major developments, things like that?
Yeah, so Adventure Game Studio, it was made originally by one person, a developer named Chris Jones, who I think he first released it in 1997 as Adventure Creator, and then he released it in 1999 as Adventure Game Studio, and I started using it in 2001. He would constantly update it, and then I don't remember the timeline on this, because to me it's just like, 2019 was 2 years ago. So I may be off by maybe 5 years or so, but I want to say like 10 or 15 years ago, maybe more, maybe less, it went open source. And so a few members of the AGS community have been working on it and updating it fairly regularly. I mean, there's a new update every 6 months or less. So yeah, it's still being worked on. It's funny because I guess there's a lot of people who think that because it's been around for so long that it doesn't get updated and that it's old and clunky. And I mean, it's certainly not a state-of-the-art engine or anything by any means, but it's also not like incredibly clunky or anything. There was a time when, yeah, sure, there was limitations on resolution of games, but that hasn't been a thing for a very long time. I mean, if you want to make a 2D point-and-click adventure game, AGS is pretty much your go-to. And it's pretty easy to I mean, I say it's easy to pick up, saying that keeping in mind that I started using it way back when. But I mean, it's object-oriented scripting, and the best thing is that it has a very extensive manual. So, and a pretty active community, both on Discord and on the AGS forum. So if you run into any problems or any figuring out how to do something, there's always some way to figure out how to do it. So I'd say it's very user friendly. And that's one of the things I love about it. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like one of the funniest things I keep seeing is that every time like a new adventure game gets like picked up by like the mainstream, a lot of the adventure, the adventure genre is finally back after all these years. Where,
oh boy,
as every like indie fan knows, I'm sure everyone watching knows, like the adventure genre never really went away. Like there are, at this point, hundreds, if not thousands, of adventure game studio developed games, or at least over the past 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, adventure game studios specifically, I don't know if there's that many. There's definitely more than 5, I would say, I can name that have come out in the past, like, 2 years alone. But yeah, I mean, this is a can of worms. I don't know if you wanna open up. But yeah, the whole discourse of, the mortality of adventure games is just I don't even wanna think about it anymore because it's like it's very clearly, like you say, they never went anywhere. I mean, there's more as I keep banging the drum, there's more adventure games released there have been more adventure games released in the last 5 years alone than ever were during, like, the classic, quote, unquote, "golden age" of the '90s. So,
Mhm.
it's funny because it's now it's at a point where I never thought we would be before, where it's like, it used to be that you would release, an adventure game and it was like, "Oh, wow, look, a new adventure game." Now it's like you release an adventure game and it's like, "Pfft, what? That's the 7th one this week." And it's really hard to get noticed or anything. So thanks for having me on, because that very much helps get the word out. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah.
Mhm. And one of the more fascinating things I think that I've seen, especially with a lot of the other adventure game developers I've spoken with, is I guess like how much like the design of point and click adventure
Mm,
games have really shifted over the past like 15 years. Even more
yeah.
so now. Again, like you mentioned, of course, like the golden age of the adventure genre. Like we go way back to like the likes of LucasArts, Monkey Island, Broken Sword, etc., etc. And then you have
Mhm.
kind of like the 2000s where it got like really brain melty. I remember I have like friends who tell me all about like the horrors of trying to solve like what was it stuff like Siberia. There's been like
Mhm.
4 or 5 like European like Avenger series that I think I own on Steam, and I've
Yeah.
never had the the fortitude to load them up. And then we got to the 2010s, and
Mm,
one of the things I think has really shifted is I guess like moving away, or I guess like really changing like puzzle design and puzzle philosophy. This was something that I talked with not Dave Gilbert, the other Dave from who did Monkey Island.
Grossman.
Yeah, Dave Grossman. Thank you. And he did what was it? Not them. Was it Thimbleweed Park? I think all my
Uh,
adventure games are like starting to like blur in my head.
no, he didn't work on Thimbleweed Park. He worked on Return to Monkey Island, and he
Okay.
had worked at Telltale for a little bit before that
Yeah.
as well.
And like to that point, like and like Telltale's another big example of like moving more towards
Mhm.
like a story, more cinematic approach. I guess
Yeah.
like for you again, going from like a Golden Wake to
Mhm.
Lamplight to Rosewater and all the other ones that you've worked on and stuff like that, like has your approach to puzzle design changed, or like what are your thoughts on like where like puzzles in these games, I guess, like fit within the grand
Mm,
scheme?
mm. Okay. This is gonna be a long answer, so please bear with me. So, yeah, it's interesting the points you make. It's yes, there is the classic '90s adventure game design philosophy, which is puzzles that are on the more obtuse side. I mean, depending on which games we're talking about, they range from logical but complex to just completely nonsensical. And then, yeah, there was definitely that period in the early 2000s where there was a lot of like European games. And I can't remember who it is. I think it might be Alistair Beckett King, who, aside from being a great stand-up comedian, is also a an indie adventure game developer. But I believe he's the one that says that he has a theory that the reason that a lot of those adventure games like Siberia or the Runaway series have such crazy puzzles is because the designers grew up playing all of those classic games, but because they were playing like a translated version, or because maybe they were playing an English version and they didn't speak English fluently, they didn't quite understand, or maybe it because like you have examples like Monkey Island 2, of course, the infamous monkey wrench puzzle, which is like a play on words, or like the car wash thing in Day of the Tentacle, even though like they give you an in-game clue about that. But like it's possible that the theory is that it's possible something was lost in translation. So to them, the wordplay doesn't come across, so it just feels like, oh, this makes no sense. This is just a random illogical puzzle. this must be how all adventure games are designed. And so they ran with that, and that's why there's a lot of weird puzzles in that particular school of adventure games from that era, which I think is a fascinating and highly plausible theory, but it's just a theory. But yeah, moving on into the more modern adventure game design. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there's been more of a focus on story rather than puzzles because of the fact that, yeah, like with the advent of, I mean, the internet's been around for a very long time, but even more so now with just like so many more games coming out, that you as the player can or you as a designer can't expect the player to be stuck for a long time without just quitting and never coming back to your game. And of course, you know, the internet is right there, so you can look up a video or a walkthrough or whatever. So my approach has shifted a lot. When I started, when I made a Golden Wake, I was coming off of the Ben Jordan series, and the Ben Jordan series had been, as it started, me basically, my design philosophy was just, hey, I've played adventure games, I know how they work. I'm going to try and emulate that. So I was still in the mindset of like adventure game puzzles, and there were some puzzles in a Golden Wake. I mean, it's probably the most puzzly. Well, that's not true. Shardlight was a lot more puzzly, but a lot of the puzzles in Shardlight were like, use your crossbow to shoot something, which, yeah, I feel like I missed opportunities in Shardlight to make more like mechanical puzzles because the player character is a mechanic. But anyway, yeah, my design has changed with each game because with Lamplight City, I wanted to make a detective game, and I was inspired by the Westwood Studios Blade Runner game, which was more like a detective game. It didn't have inventory. And so I thought, well, let's see if I can make a game that doesn't have inventory or inventory puzzles. And then with Rosewater, I went back to that. But then I also wanted to see if I could make a game that had puzzles that had various solutions. So that didn't necessarily have to be like, if you didn't want to solve the puzzle, you could skip it, or you could get one of your companions to do it for you, or you could just do a more violent solution. Because I wanted to play around with like the branching narrative and stuff. But yeah, I mean, nowadays, and especially now after having released Rosewater and having seen the reception to it, it feels like as a modern adventure game designer, you're kind of in between a rock and a hard place, because you have still that player base who want that difficulty level from the classics, which isn't really, I feel it's not really sustainable game design for the reasons I mentioned before. And those people get upset if the puzzles are not hard enough in their eyes. But it's like, you never know, because one person's ridiculously hard puzzle could be another person's super easy puzzle. And then you have people who really don't like that stuff, and they hear adventure game and they automatically think, oh, those are games with stupid puzzles. So those are people who might be more interested in the narrative and the characters and stuff, not necessarily in the puzzles. So it's like you have to find that right balance, and it's incredibly tricky to do that. But I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about, you know, the next project and trying to go back to maybe more of that open world philosophy where it's like you have multiple things you can do at once and you can do it in any order. And I think that makes people, I think the trick is making it feel like the puzzles are tougher than they actually are. So, but yeah, but I don't want to go into designer brain just yet because I need to take a break after this game. But yes, to go back and answer the question, that's basically how my design has changed. I mean, I basically started off wanting to do adventure game puzzles, then thinking, well, let's shake that up, and then going back and thinking, well, rather than puzzles, how about obstacles, and how about if there's different ways to do them? And then, you know, now I want to go back and see, well, how about if I just try doing something different? So, yeah. Excuse me.
That's right. Yeah, I
talked too much.
Don't worry, I think my voice will be dying before the stream is over.
Okay.
And I think, like, to that point about, like, the structure of puzzles and the adventure genre, that was, there's, like, two things I want to, like, bring up. I guess the first one is that, like, to this idea of kind of, like, compartmentalizing, like, the world. I think that's something that we've been seeing more in, like, the last, like, I would say, like last, like, 5 to 6 years. I remember playing, like, what was it, the Excavation of Hobbs Barrow. I think that was, like, 2023, maybe 2024 again, but dates and times mean nothing to me. But it was one of those games, and of course, with Watchet Eye, with a lot of their more recent titles, like, and I know with Rosewater too, you have this kind of, like, chapter format where, again, like, each chapter maybe has, like, 2 to 3 major areas or 2 or 3 scenes, and the puzzles are kind of restrained or constrained to that, and then you move on to the next vignette. And again, like, that's a very sharp turn from the 90s adventure genre, where it's just basically, here's every scene you can go into, try to find, the one item you need over here, to then bring it back over here, to then go over here. And then the other point I want to ask you, I think there's a greater conversation for this one, is this idea where we're seeing, I guess, like, a push towards, I don't know if there's an actual term for this, but I guess, like, meta puzzles. We talk about something like Animal Well that came out last year, or Blueprints, which, again, we're recording this like the end of April. Blueprints has been out for about like a week or two, and it has blown up tremendously among the people who played it. And with a game like Blueprints, it is a puzzle game. There's a lot of puzzles, but they're not puzzles in the same way that we talk about when we talk about, like, the point-and-click adventure genre. It's more about, okay, I know I found this clue that's going to direct me to an item over here, and that the world itself has these puzzles that it doesn't quite, like, tell you, but they exist. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to, like, again, like, this is probably too big just for the two of us to talk about, but I want to get your thoughts on that as an adventure game designer, as someone who's also designed puzzles. Like, what do you think about this idea? And even, like, something like Tunic from, I think, 2 years ago also had this idea, like, a grand meta puzzle to solve. Compared again to a more traditional, okay, this guy's blocking your way. How do you get past him kind of puzzle?
Right. Well, I haven't played Tunic, and I haven't played Animal Well. I haven't played Blueprints either, but I've heard enough discourse about it to get an idea of it. I'll start with the second question first, and then I'll address the thing you mentioned first. But yeah, I mean, I would classify Blueprints as a puzzle game more than an adventure game.
Yeah.
I mean, it obviously is more of in the genre of, like, Myst or Riven or whatever, where it's puzzles first, and if any story second. It's like The Witness, right? There was no narrative in The Witness. It was just you were walking around the island discovering and solving the puzzles and stuff. I think the thing too to keep in mind is that just the adventure genre itself has gotten so broad that there's just subgenres within it, because you have games like The Witness and Blueprints, which are puzzle games first and foremost. You have games like Return of the Obra Dinn, which are a little bit more of a marriage of those two. And like the case of the Golden Idol, where it's like your primary gameplay is deduction, but there's also a story because you're uncovering the story, and at the end of it you have this narrative, and you're like, okay, well, obviously I pieced all these clues together, now I know that all this happened. You're not experiencing the story in real time, you're uncovering the story that happened before, as opposed to an adventure game where you're playing through the story in the present and you just have to solve the puzzles to proceed through the story. But yeah, as far as the design goes, I agree with you, but I also have to point out that a lot of classic adventure games also had that same sectional design. Because you look at a classic game like Loom, for example. You start off on the island, you move on to the next section, you never go back. You start, you go to the next set piece, you go to the next set piece, you go to the next set piece. Same with, like, for example, Leisure Suit Larry 2, where it's like you start off and then you go to the next place and you go to the next place, which this is another tangent entirely, but that kind of design could lead to, like, the Walking Dead scenarios, where if you missed an important item in the first section, you couldn't go back to it, so you were stuck once you got to the end section because you had missed the thing. Same with Gold Rush, right? Like, you start off in Brooklyn, you do the whole Oregon Trail section, and then you end up in the West. but yeah, that design's existed for a long time. I mean, there's that, and then which is, I guess you could call it the more linear design, and then you have like the more open design, like Monkey Island, like, you know, Curse of Monkey Island, where you have, you know, you're on the first island, you have all these puzzles to solve, then you move on to the next island, you have all these puzzles to solve. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just choice. I do find it goes back to what I was saying before. I do find that players tend to, I think, find that more open design to feel more challenging, because the problem that you run into with more sectional design is that, like you say, if it's only one or two scenes, you're limited, because if you have everything available to you in those couple of scenes, people are going to think it's too easy, because it's like, okay, well, I know what the puzzle is. There's the thing in the next room. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can play with it a little more, where, you know, you can have like someone's power washing back there. I hope that's not coming off too much, or coming out too much. What was I saying? Oh, right. So yeah, so I think if you have like, you know, a scenario where you gather a bunch of items, and then in the next scenario it turns out that you can use some of those items that you're carrying in the current situation, maybe that's a little bit more open. But then you also have to make sure that the player picks up the item. Like in Rosewater, for example, there's an item that you get in Act 2 in one of the main scenes in the second main scene in Act 2 that then you can use, then becomes important again in Act 3. So of course I had to make sure that you had to get it and had to use it in Act 2 so that it would be guaranteed to be in your possession by Act 3 to avoid those Walking Dead scenarios. But yeah, I mean, I think it just boils down to personal preference of design. But as I say, like, yeah, you have to be careful, because there's pitfalls to both design methods, which is, like I say, in the more closed off one, you run the risk of people thinking it's too easy because you have everything too readily available. In the other one, the problem becomes designing it in such a way that it doesn't feel overwhelming. Because if you have all of these giant areas to explore, and like the one thing you need is in this one very specific things, and then you have to go back and backtrack and go to all those places and find it again, then that becomes frustrating, because it's like you're just wandering around aimlessly until you find the one specific thing you need. So yeah, it's tricky. There's I think that's definitely why it's hard to design adventure games. So yeah.
And when you tie this to the story and kind of the world design, that's also adds many other wrinkles to it. And another question that I always like to ask like adventure game developers is like, how do you approach, you know, the story tying it to puzzles? Like some developers, you know, focus on puzzle first, story second, vice versa, and some just kind of like, you know, do it as it comes up. So kind of like, what is your approach like with like building Rosewater and your previous games?
My approach tends to be setting first, then story and characters, and then puzzles. Because basically, this is all in very broad strokes, of course, as it's going. So, like, obviously for Lamplight City, because it was an alternate history, I spent a lot of time coming up with the setting first. And to an extent Rosewater as well, but not as much, because I already had the baseline to draw from. I just had to say, okay, well, what does the Old West look like in this world? But yeah, then the main thing I think about is, okay, what kind of story do I want to tell? What are the general plot beats? Like, where do I want the story to go? And then as I'm building up the story, I think, okay, well, what are the obstacles or the puzzles that can come up organically in this story? One of my major mantras when designing Rosewater was, is this too adventure gamey? Because it becomes very easy to want to, you know, my main fear is that it's like, oh, well, there's not enough puzzles. People are gonna get mad because there's not enough puzzles. But I would rather the game not have puzzles or as many puzzles, than the game be full of just ridiculously arbitrary roadblocks. Like, you said from what you said, you're in Act 2. So I'll give you some examples from earlier that you would have encountered. So, for example, in Act 1, there's a part where you have to turn on a generator in an abandoned laboratory. And there's a few items that you need to do that. And, through exploration and talking with your companions and going through, you find them. Now, one of the items that you need is one of your companions picks it up, and he makes this whole big fuss about it, and he has it. And once you learn that you need it, you can ask him, and he just gives it to you. And that's fine. Now, if I were thinking more like, oh, well, this needs to be harder, I would have been like, well, I need to come up with some arbitrary reason for why he doesn't want to give it to you. And then you have to do another puzzle to figure out how to make him give you this item. But then that becomes frustrating because it's like, well, why don't you just give it to me, right? Like, so that's part of the reason I didn't want to do things like that. There was another thing where it was like, I don't know how you solved getting out of Chrysalis. There's two ways to late in Act 1, you find yourself in this commune, and you need to create a distraction. And you can either create the distraction by figuring out some information and inputting a code to get into a secret room, or you can blow up the lab. And originally, when I was designing that section, I was like, okay, well, you have to do the code puzzle. And then, actually, no, I think it was before the code puzzle. The original thing was that you found like a little statue, like a little artist's mannequin that belonged to the person in the lab. And the puzzle was like figuring out from his research and stuff, like some position to put it in so that it would open up a secret compartment with like a little thing. And I was like, okay, no, I'm scrapping this because this is way too adventure gamey. Not just because it's like, first of all, it's a silly puzzle, but then stepping back, it's like, who would have this? Like, it always astonishes me in adventure games how many like ridiculous bespoke locking mechanisms people have just for the sake of having like a complicated puzzle. Like, okay, a safe I understand, but like a safe with a combination lock I understand, but a safe where it's like symbols and little slidey things, and it's like, no, nobody would have this. And don't even get me started on like wiring puzzles, because those are when it's just like, oh, let me just do this, and like, no one would do that. So yeah, it's tricky, because you don't want to break the immersion of the story with just like a ridiculous thing. But then at the same time, it's tricky because you want to have variety. You don't want to just have it all be like guess the code puzzles or fetch the item for people puzzles. So it becomes difficult to try and figure out how to mix things up. But again, that's the challenge of adventure game design.
And with that puzzle that you mentioned, I did figure out the date for it, which I feel very happy that I did. And one thing that I liked about that, and again, not spoiling the overall puzzle, but I like how you found other dates. The main character will comment saying, oh, I guess this one's not it, or he didn't think it would be that one. And I think there's that other side of puzzle design that is kind of slept on by a lot of people, is how do you guide the player to those respective answers? And one thing that I did appreciate with Rosewater, and even with like going back to something like Unavowed from Latcheye from a few years ago, is having like a party or a partner that you can bounce ideas off of. And the different companions basically serve the role of both being, like an exposition for the area, but also as kind of like your handy-dandy hint generator. Because, of course, like with that puzzle, I did go around and ask, okay, so how do you think I get past this? What do you think I'm going to be doing here? And it's a really great idea. And again, like with the idea of giving the player like hints and clues, there's always that kind of spectrum of, do you just tell the player, okay, just go over here, take the green book, put it in the red bookcase? Or, but do you make it like too opaque? It's like, okay, I need something to stick into an object somewhere in this mansion, and that's your entire hint.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. I mean, there's lots of ways that you can give clues. I mean, if you have NP characters that are with you, that's definitely one way of doing it. In Rosewater, you also have the diary, which that was a thing too, where like all of the information that you need to solve that code puzzle you get from talking to the characters in that area. And once you talk to all of them, you get this update in your diary that kind of sums up what they all told you. That's so that, you know, obviously as the player, you're not expected to remember everything, or if you leave and come back, then, you know, you have that information there. But hopefully it's enough to help you solve the thing. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways that you can nudge the player in the right direction, and lots of ways to kind of figure out and anticipate what the player might think. And I mean, obviously beta testing helps a lot with that, because, you know, as a designer, you try and think of all possibilities, but you're never going to be able to think of all of them. I mean, some people try things that you would never in a million years have thought of, but sometimes they make a good point. Like, you know, as a common example, you know, like you might have a pair of scissors in your inventory and a knife, and you have to cut something, and it's like you have to use the knife, but you can't use the scissors, and it's like, well, why? You have to have some justification for why one sharp thing works, but the other sharp thing doesn't. But I mean, I think one of the ways I tried to sort of reduce that, and sort of make it more communicative to the player, was to minimize the number of just generic, I didn't want to do that, or I can't, that doesn't work things. I gave a whole talk about this at Adventure X in 2023, about making your design more player friendly. Because the one thing that irritates me the most about adventure games is that lack of communication. And it always makes me sad when I hear people say, oh, I'm bad at adventure games, or I'm too stupid to play adventure games, or whatever. Like, no, you're not bad at them. You're not too stupid. It's just that a lot of adventure games are just very bad at communicating what you need to be doing. Like you say, you know, like I think one of the things that more modern adventure games like Thimbleweed Park and Return to Monkey Island and some others have done that have been great is to give you a to-do list. You know, if you have multiple things you have to be doing, it's great to have like a little in-game checklist to keep track of what you're doing. And another, yeah, like I said, that, you know, the main thing that I tried to do with the inventory also, which also Return to Monkey Island also did, it goes back to even like The Longest Journey, is that the inventory item will only highlight over a hotspot where an inventory item can be used. So you don't get stuck in that classic use every item on every hotspot and just get, nope, can't do that. Nope, that doesn't work. Because nothing makes you feel more frustrated as a player than to just have the player be telling you that without any additional hints. So that's the thing, right? Like, so if, like, for example, to use that example from Rosewater again, you have to open up this panel to get inside the guts of this generator, and you need to unscrew the panel. So obviously the panel needs an inventory item to be used on it. So if you use the correct inventory item, it works. But if you use another inventory item that's not the correct item, instead of just saying, oh, that doesn't work, I would say, this won't unscrew the panel, which then tells you, okay, I have to find something to unscrew the panel. And so because there are fewer possibilities to do that, it gives you more opportunity to write custom messages that nudge the player in the right direction. And some people might argue that, oh, that makes it too simplistic. But my counter argument to that is that you have games like the classic 9-verb interface for LucasArts games, which I hate. I don't mind. I don't care. I'm saying this. I hate it because it gives you this illusion of freedom and limitless possibility to interact with the world. But 9 times out of 10, you'll do like push sofa and it'll say, I can't move that. Or you do like use whatever. And it's like, no, I don't know how. So it's like, unless you do the exact right solutions, you're really just being given this giant opportunity to just be told no. And so I want to mitigate that in my design. So yeah, and that's also why I had a single click interface, and a context sensitive menu when there was more than one action for something, because I wanted every action to have a specific reaction.
And I think that kind of goes with like a larger discussion about trying to like streamline a lot of the more like frustrating or pain points, not just in the adventure genre, but just in games more general. Like again, like I've been talking a lot more about approachability in games for like the last like 4 or 5 years, and like with the adventure genre in particular, like as you said, like with a few of those points about having to click on every single hotspot in an area. Okay, do I use the wrench on the hat? Do I use it on the chair? Do I use it here or there? And even just like the act of like moving around. Like one of the things that like my like biggest pet peeve is when your character walks very slowly and you can't just like fast forward from like here to there. You have to watch him walk ever so slowly over here and then ever so slowly back. And I think it goes with a point that you brought up earlier that like for a lot of people they don't want to be frustrated with the game. They don't want to feel like the game is keeping them hostage or just taking longer than it needs to. And I liked your example of kind of like reducing like the amount of puzzles I needed. Because again, like to go back to your point about getting an object from someone like who's like in your party, there would be like adventure games where they'll be like, no, I'm not giving to you, so I need this. So you then go over there, but they're not going to give it to you. Then you have to go over there, and you get like the ever classic escort or ferry quest or delivery boy to get every single thing. And it is that again like that balance, because there are people who will want that. They just want to do all these very weird and very esoteric puzzles, but a lot of people don't. They want to move things forward. They want to kind of see where things are going to go in the game.
Yeah, and I mean that's fine. Like that's totally fine. There's games out there that will do that, and that's people who want that can play those games. That's just not how I particularly would like to play a game. So that's not really how I design my games, and especially because I don't want to think about having to think about like that. Like, I would with my games, I would much rather tell a good story with interesting characters than have to worry about the puzzles. Because like when you talk to people about their favorite adventure games, even the classic ones, they'll tell you, oh, I love Monkey Island. Oh, I love Grim Fandango. I love the characters. I love the story. I have never heard anybody say, oh yeah, I really love that puzzle in Monkey Island where you have to like switch the mugs of grog around and carry the grog over to melt the luck. Usually when people talk about puzzles, it's to complain about them. Oh, I hated that cat hair mustache puzzle, or oh, that stupid puzzle where you have to with the monkey wrench, right? Nobody ever says, oh yeah, the puzzles in that adventure game is really what's memorable to me. So yeah, I mean, I don't think adventure games shouldn't have puzzles. I just think that they should make sense. And so yeah.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, it reminded me of when I tried to play, was it the Seventh Guess for the first time? There was this like chess puzzle, and I had like no idea, and like a friend said, let me spoil it for you, and he like wrote me like a 8-paragraph of exactly how you do. I'm really like, I don't even know how to solve this, and you're giving me the solution to this one.
Yeah, the Seventh Guest is another one that's primarily a puzzle game first, because there is a story, but it's hidden behind all those puzzles, and they try and justify it with like, oh yeah, he was a toy maker, okay, but like, it's
that is like the same thing they did with like Resident Evil, like with like, why is this mansion full of death traps and puzzles? Oh, the guy was just a wacky inventor, and he set this entire mansion up like that.
That's what I'm talking about. That's the bending over backwards to make an arbitrary excuse for why this is a thing. But yeah.
And to bring us back to like the story, and especially with something like with Rosewater, like with the different companions, as we said, like traditionally in most adventure games, and this is some of the conversations I've had a lot in the past, but I remember, I forget who it was, I think it could have been Dave Gilbert who said it, maybe it was you, I forget, like, who was like saying like, adventure game protagonists is always like some of the most like sociopathic people, because they'll like do anything and everything to get like that one key, or to get like the handkerchief out of someone's pocket.
Yeah.
With Rosewater in particular, with the different companions, and kind of like writing and structuring the game around the fact that it's not just one character, talking to themselves for the next 8 to 10 hours. What was it like designing the story, or even just like coming up with like the dialogue, when you're not designing around just like one principal character, but an entire group?
Dialogue specifically,
Yeah.
or do you want me? Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean the dialogue. Well, with Rosewater it was interesting because usually when I write the dialogue for my games, I've done it just as I'm making the game in the engine, and then can make edits as necessary. With Rosewater, I did it all in an external script, and it took me 6 months to write out the whole game. And I had different sections. I mean, I basically did it like by room, and I had dialogue for just like NPC dialogue, where it was just the classic, talk to the NPC. This is the dialogue tree, whatever. I had, cutscenes where it was just action that happened, that like entering a room for the first time and they have a little conversation. And then I had interactive dialogues, which was like, maybe a cutscene starts, but halfway through the cutscene, Harley makes a comment or she gets asked something and you're given the choice of the answers. Yeah, I mean that's basically how I wrote it. It was, I guess, the question was like, how do I approach it?
I guess like
Or
coming up or like writing the story with the fact that, instead of just having like one principal character who's, the only one like on the scene, the only one who's like,
right.
really interacting, you now have like a group that goes with it.
Yeah, I mean that, if anything, it made it a little easier because, like you say, it's not just the one character talking to themselves. So it makes it more dynamic to be able to have these conversations with the companions, and each of the companions has their own personality, so they'll make a comment about what's happening with their own personal spin on it. Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about like who I wanted and what I wanted, because I wanted to approach it in such a way that it felt like a road trip with your friends. And I looked towards like Telltale's The Walking Dead season 1 for inspiration for that, as far as like, you're moving along with a bunch of different companions and your actions and choices affect how they perceive you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that was the first thing. Then I started thinking about like how I could make them interesting and how they could fit into the world. So I started thinking about, what characters do you expect to see in a Western?
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I wanted Harley to be the main character, and I knew Harley was going to be a writer who had a past in boxing. So I was like, all right, well, this opens up the ability to, like you said, as far as the sociopath thing, if Harley punches somebody to get what she wants, it's not like an out of left field turn for her character, because it's like, oh, she comes from a rough background, she punches someone,
Mm-hmm.
and then she can deal with her feelings about that, and that will make her more complex as a character. So, I obviously wanted to have like a classic cowboy, which is where Jake came from. And Jake, of course, being the classic cowboy, was like, all right, well, he's going to be, if we're thinking about this in terms of like RPG archetypes, Jake's like the charisma character.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to be the one that's always going to be like talking his way out of situations, or like playing up the drama and the showmanship and stuff. So that's why Jake is usually like, oh yeah, let's put on a show. Let's help these people out. Let's do this. And then you have Danny, who's Jake's loyal assistant, who is like the quiet one, but also is kind of like the I don't want to say annoying kid brother, but he's like the kid brother who's looking for approval, and he's always like, oh, please like me, but he's also very quiet. But he's like the sharpshooter, so if you need something shot down, like an accuracy thing, like he's the sniper, right? So that was, Danny's perspective on stuff is usually like, oh, be careful, because in getting to know the characters, you learn more about their pasts, and you learn a little bit more about why they are the way they are. And then you have Phil, who's the classic like revolutionary character, who's the explosive guy, but he's like the party guy. Well, not party, but he's like the good time guy. And he's, the idea with him is that he's been exiled and he's been fighting in this revolution. So for him, any day could be his last day. So he wants to live life to the fullest. So he's always about the drinking and the, let's blow things up and, whatever. Who cares? Let's go out in a blaze of glory. And then Nadine, who's the doctor, she's the more like naive, sheltered, but also powerful healer character. So, she's seeing the world for the first time, like through fresh eyes, because she hasn't traveled before. So she's like, wow, gee whiz, look at all this crazy stuff we're seeing. And then you have Lola, who's the wagon driver, who's like, she's the no nonsense, like, I don't want to hear about it. I'm just the tracker, like whatever. And then she's the challenging one where getting her to open up is like the most rewarding bit, because it's like she has no reason to open up to you. So like if you gain her friendship, it feels good. But yeah, so all of these different character perspectives really helped in fleshing out the world and just the story and everything. That was a very long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
But I got excited.
And one of the interesting parts about Rosewater is, as you get further into the game, I know, again, I haven't reached that point yet, that you will have, there's like exclusive dialogue or exclusive situations based on like who you befriend or you become more friendly with among the crew. And I also liked, to go back to something that you were saying earlier about having multiple solutions to puzzles. Because I think that's something that it's very tricky to convey that to people, especially in an adventure game. Because you'll have, like with a lot of adventure games, they'll say, oh, you do have all these options. But again, it's really, okay, there's just one. Because to go back to, you can try push, pull, jump, kick. None of that works. There's always that one. And it was very refreshing. I remember, like, early in the game, again, this won't be too big of a spoiler, when you're trying to get into the movie theater, to see Jake for the first time, that there's different ways to approach it. You want to pay him? Do you want to just punch him in the face? Or, of course, you have to go and try and steal the watch. And, again, it's one of those things that we were talking about, like an older adventure game, there will only be one option. It will be whatever would move the story along exactly how the developer wants. But with designing, I guess, like the scenario for Rosewater, I guess, how did you decide, like, what aspects you want to make it more malleable in terms of choices, and what did you want to just make it, okay, in order to keep the story going along, this has to happen, kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of was I guess, a case-by-case basis, because obviously I didn't want to, I wanted to make as many puzzles with multiple solutions as possible, but I also didn't want to make every single puzzle with multiple solutions, because obviously that would have increased the production time significantly. But it wasn't just have the puzzles have multiple solutions. It was also incorporate your companions somehow. So that theater puzzle, for example, if I could, looking under the hood a little bit for this, and this is in the demo, so it's the puzzle itself is not the spoiler. It might be later is the spoiler, but like you said, there's three primary ways to get into the theater, and I say, well, technically four. So anyway, you can punch the kid out, which is like the easiest way, because then you bypass the whole quest thing. You can take his quest to get the watch. And now if you take the quest to get the watch, he tells you where it is, and you find that there's a padlock on the door. So now you have two options. You can either find some lockpicks, by which you have to solve some puzzles, another puzzle to get the lockpicks, and pick the lock and sneak in and get the watch. Or you can pick up a tile and smash the lock. Now, that's all well and good. But then I was like, okay, well, how do I want this to actually affect the world in the grand scheme of things? Because it's not just, oh yeah, okay, you could do different things. I want you to actually feel like the choice that you made had an impact. So, if you punch the kid out after you come out of the Wild West show, you get arrested and you get taken to jail. And in jail, you meet Lola Johnson, who is one of your companions. She's the driver. Now, at this time, you don't necessarily know that if you're playing blind, or if you haven't realized. But in the jail cell, you have a little dialogue with her, and you can talk to her and tell her why you did this, and if you can be nice to her, you can be defensive or whatever. And based on that, she already has an opinion of you at that point. So later on at the end of the Act 1, where you're like, oh, we have to hire a wagon. Oh, Lola has a wagon. If you punch the kid, Lola's in jail, so you have to figure out how to get her out of jail. So that's something right there. Now, if you decided to do the quest, if you sneak in with the lockpicks, you sneak in, you sneak out, that's it. Lola's not in jail when you come back. Lola also doesn't know that you stole her watch, because it turns out, surprise, surprise, the kid was fooling you. It was actually Lola's watch that you stole. But when you go to hire her, if in talking to her, she says, "Oh, she mentions that she's been robbed." And if you say, "Oh, you were robbed?" She tells you, "Yeah, someone stole my watch." At which point you can go and see Jem and get the watch back from him and give it to her. And if you do that, she's like, "Oh, thank you," and she gives you a discount on hiring the wagon. That's another thing. And plus, her relationship with you goes up because you helped her. Now, if you do the tile path and you decide to break your way in, she catches you, and she's like, "What the hell are you doing in my thing?" And you can say whatever. But at that point, she's mad at you because you broke into her house, her place of residence. So then later, when you hire her, she's like, "I'm not hiring you my wagon until you get me my watch back." So then you have to get the watch back, and she doesn't give you a discount because she's already mad at you, and she's already mad at you because of that. So that's already affected your relationship with her based on how you solve that puzzle. And it's the same thing like when you first go into the offices of the Rosewater Post and Phil gets thrown out the window. You can either get the doctor, or you can get the sheriff, or you can ignore him. And then when you meet him later and he recognizes you, you can either play dumb and be like, "Oh, I don't know who you are," or say like, "Oh yeah, that was you," and then like based on what you did, his relationship with you changes there too. So yeah, that's part of it. And like, for example, what I mentioned before with the code thing and with the lab thing, like if you decide to blow up the lab, obviously Phil likes you more because you went with his plan and he likes blowing things up. So there's that too. But then the fourth way, which there's a secret achievement tied to it, which is actually my favorite way, is you can go through the trouble of doing the whole lockpick thing and getting the watch, and then you can get the tile and you can actually smash the watch in front of Jem. And he's like, "What the hell?" And you can be like, "I don't like being sent on errands, kid." And you can do that. And then later in the game, if you've built up your relationship with Lola high enough and you get her high relationship excursion, there's a little moment where they're talking and Lola's like, "Oh yeah, I lost my pa's pocket watch. It was the only memento I had of him." And you can confess that you're the one who stole it. And then she's like, "Oh, okay." Now, if you can do that regardless of if you did the sneaking in and you give Jem the watch and you don't get it back for her, so she gives you the discount, you can confess that you stole it and she forgives you and whatever. But if you did that smash it in front of him thing, she's like, "Oh yeah, I gave it to Jem," and she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to have a talk with him when I get back to Rosewater." And she's like, Actually, about that, I smashed the watch." And she's like, "What?" And there's this great little moment where she's like, "That's the funniest thing I've heard all day." And Harley's like, "What? You're not mad?" And she's like, "No, that's funny. I'm glad that you taught him a lesson, even if so." Yeah. So there was a lot of branching and a lot of little character moments like that, but they came up organically as I was writing it. And that was basically how I dealt with it. So yeah, for every multiple solution thing, I basically thought about how to best incorporate the characters and their relationships.
That was a really good one. For me, I did steal the watch. I think my favorite part is when you have to get it back, and Jim's like, "Well, if you hit me here, everyone's going to be so upset about you.
Yeah.
And don't do it." It's like, yeah, sure, about that. And then like no one cares. Like, okay.
Well, my favorite exchange with him there is if you manage to persuade him and you tell him, being a criminal isn't fun like you think it is, and she gives him this whole monologue about how like where she comes from in Lamplight City, it was a lot tougher, and like people would he would have gotten his throat cut, and like if he had tried to pull the little pickpocketing scam, that he thinks he owns the town because it's a boring town. And then he's like, so she's like, "Yeah, whatever." And he's like, "All right, fine, I'll give you the watch back." And then she's just like, "Go read some books. You'll thank me for it later."
And speaking about Lamplight City, one thing I also wanted to ask you with Rosewater, again, like not really a spoiler, it does take place in the same universe as Lamplight, but obviously completely different locale. There's no, you don't need to play Lamplight to play Rosewater. I guess, like, how much did designing Lamplight kind of, like, infer on building Rosewater? Or are they, like, both, like, so removed that it didn't really, like, I guess, like, influence you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're two different types of games, because Lamplight City is a detective game and Rosewater is more a traditional adventure, like, journey game. Like Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis style adventure, like you're going on a trip. So beyond just like the setting and exploring the setting, not really. I mean, I guess the one thing that kind of influenced the design for Rosewater was I also wanted to keep the idea of like multiple, or rather branching narrative, because in Lamplight City, with each case had multiple possible solutions. But in Lamplight City, if you closed off a lead, you couldn't investigate any further. And on paper, that sounded good, but in practice, it became frustrating because obviously, as a player, you want to win. So even if you got to the point where you closed off all your leads and you could declare the case unsolvable and move on to the next one, that desire as a player to succeed and to win is takes a hit, because it's like, well, okay, but I didn't get the perfect outcome, so I'm not really happy. I would rather reload. So I was conscious of that when I was designing the branching stuff in Rosewater. I didn't want to make you as the player feel like a choice you made had locked you out of content, but rather that it had put you on an alternate path to see something different. So that's, I think, the biggest influence that it had on my design.
Yep. And trying to, again, I guess, like, influence, like, the player in terms of, I guess, like, where they're going to go with, like, the different story, different puzzles. Like, it's always, there's, like, another very interesting challenge for adventure games, especially, again, when you have a branching narrative. Like, there are people who, as we all know, they will try and optimize. They want to get the perfect ending. I don't know if you've played any of the games from the developer of the Cat Lady. This is like
I haven't, no, but I know I'm familiar with the games. I just haven't played them.
Yeah, like, each one of their games has the kind of, like, quote unquote, like, golden ending. Like, it is like, this is the true best. You did all. But to get that, you need to play the game very specific. Like, if you mess one part of the chain up, you're not getting that ending. And considering how long the game is, it's very unlikely that a lot of people are going to be, okay, well, I only got the slightly good ending. Let me replay the entire, 8 to 10 hour game, and I'll get the better ending. And then there are, again, like, people, like, for myself, like, for, like, a lot of games that have, like, different narratives, different choices, I tend to typically only play them one time, because I try to play them as much of, this is how I would solve it, so, this is going to be my ending. And, once that's done, I don't feel the desire to go back, because this is how I wanted to see it. And, again, with how much, like, the adventure genre has changed over the past 15 years, it has become, I think, a lot more of a challenge to try and, like, appease, like, those two different mindsets.
Yeah, and I mean, designing branching narrative is pretty much, I don't want to say shooting yourself in the foot, but it's definitely creating a lot of work for yourself that is not necessarily going to go to be even noticed.
Yeah.
Because, like you say, one of the things too with the saturation of the market is that it's already asking a lot for someone to play a game once, let alone more than once, especially if, like you say, it's a long experience. I mean, Rosewater is like a 15 to 20 hour game. So I realized that, asking someone to replay it is asking a lot. But I still wanted to do the branching thing. I didn't want to go crazy, and obviously I didn't want to actually, well, this leads to a story about the early design of it. When I was first designing it, my plan was to have it be so that, Act 1 happened, Act 2 happened, and was structured more or less how it is now. But at the end of Act 2, I wanted it to be like, okay, well, now you have to pick how the rest of the game shakes out. Like is it going to be an adventure story? Is it going to be a treasure hunt? Or is it going to be a revenge story or whatever? And I quickly realized that having an Act 3 that was so vastly different would take even longer. So I scrapped that idea, and I just decided to design Act 3 so that it was dependent on who was with you at that time, and
Mhm.
have multiple puzzles based on that. And yeah, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to have multiple endings because, like you say, then it's like, which one is the canonical ending? You know,
Mhm.
whenever you have multiple endings, it's always obvious which one the designer felt was the canonical ending. We had this problem in Shardlight where
Mhm.
the whole game plays out the same, and then at the very end, you make this one choice between three endings, and it's like, okay, well, what does that mean, right? Nothing. So I wanted the branching to happen in the game and then lead to the same ending, just with variants.
Mhm.
So that made it a little easier because since it's companion based, like, you know, at the end, Harley's a writer. So at the end, Harley's writing about what happened to everybody. So it felt like an organic arc for everybody. So it's like, you know, this is what happened to this person, this is what happened to this person, you know, but it ends the same way.
Mhm.
And the other thing I was conscious of too, because I know a lot of the times where you have games where you can sort of do a little bit of role playing in terms of like your attitude towards people. I know that, you know, a lot of games have the option to just be like a complete jerk, like Disco Elysium, for example. Like you can be I mean, well, Disco Elysium, you're kind of always a jerk, but there's like there's levels of less jerkiness. But the point is, there's always like the option to just be a complete horrible person. And in games that I've played where that's an option, I've never like I'll go back maybe and do a second playthrough just to see what happens, but I'll always play like the good way
Mhm.
first because I, like everyone else, want to have the golden ending, right? So I knew that I wanted to have this companion relationship thing, but I didn't want to design it so that it was possible for your companions to hate you. I didn't want you to be able to antagonize them. I didn't want you to be able to make enemies of them. At one point, I was when I was designing, I was like, "Ooh, maybe if I make them hate you, like at the end of Act 2, you're all by yourself and you have to go through the ending all by yourself." But then I was like, "Well, no, extra work, and also no one's going to ever play that because that's not how people play." So so that's why and I even had to, like, just recently, like, change my own internal language about it because each companion in Act 2 has a specific, scene, which we were internally, I call excursions attributed to them. You said you were in Act 2, right?
I think I'm approaching it. I've almost made it to the big city, or I'm
But,
still.
well,
Yeah.
Act 2 is the whole journey on the wagon.
Oh yeah, then yeah,
So you're okay.
I'm in the wagon. Yeah.
Okay, so if you're already in the wagon, you've probably had some of the companion excursions. So like just as a mild spoiler, like the very first one you get is Jake, and Jake has all of them have two possible excursions. Now I was calling them low relationship and high relationship, but really it's standard relationship and high relationship because low relationship implies that you're in bad standing with them, which is not the case. It's just of the two excursions, one of them is always more just like sort of general, just kind of like because the idea is that it's specific to them to just get more of an insight into their character.
Mhm.
But the standard one is just kind of more general, and the high relationship one is a little bit more personal, so you learn a little bit more about them.
Mhm.
So Jake, for example, his standard relationship one involves a quote unquote magic spring.
Ah,
Um,
that's one that I got.
That's the one you got. Okay. So yeah, there's a magic spring, and it's kind of like, oh, Jake's falling for this trick. How are we going to deal with it? His high relationship one is they're in this little town, and they learned that the sheriff has gone missing from the deputy, but it turns out that the deputy was Jake's former assistant before he was replaced with Danny. So you go on this search for the sheriff, and the deputy and Jake are having like this little they keep having these like tense little conversations, and you're like, I'm sensing some tension here. So you
Mhm.
get to like through your what you pick and say, you get to learn like the history between these two characters and then resolve the situation. And whether they're still antagonizing each other or they learn to come together, that's how that resolves. So yeah, each character has those two particular or potential scenarios, and I did that because I wanted you to have some sort of reward for if you were focusing on, being nice to a character or getting to know a character. I wanted you to get more of a rewarding scene with them. Now, there are people who might want to go back and replay and see what the alternatives are, but I also wanted to make it feel like even if you don't and you just go through it once, that you feel like that's a satisfactory scene and that you had fun doing it, right? So, yeah. But then I also, secretly, selfishly, the ideal thing I wanted was, two people to be discussing the game and being like, "Oh yeah, that bit where Jake went to the spring and he drank the water," and someone's like, "What? What are you talking about? I didn't see that. I had to go look for a sheriff." And then, "Oh wow, this game's more complex than I thought." So, yeah.
And I'm not sure this will be too much of a spoiler, but I know you did update Rosewater after one point to have kind of like a new game plus option to make it easier for those to see like those 7 vignettes.
Yeah, well, that was in originally. Yeah, the idea originally was because so there's the companion excursions. There's 3 main scenes, which is you probably have seen at least 2 of them. Which is the first one is they take shelter from a dust storm at this old sea captain's house. There's another one where they stop and help a group of traveling performers, and then the third one is they get stuck with a commune on top of a mountain. So those 3 main scenes, you always get those, but they have various ways of potential outcomes, like positive and more negative outcomes, and based on what you do, your companions their relationship with you will be affected based on how well or how not well you do in those. And then of course you have, as I just mentioned, the companion excursions, but then there's little vignettes also. There's 6 of them total, but you only ever see 4 in a playthrough, and those get randomized at the start of a new game the first time. So what I wanted to do was, originally New Game Plus was just when you clicked on New Game Plus, you get the option to manually select the vignettes, so that if you're doing a second playthrough and you're like, okay, well, I want to see the ones I didn't get, then you can set that, or you can just leave it up to chance again. But then what I added in the patch was I always had this internal little cheesy like graph with the characters' heads like on a vertical graph, just to kind of monitor their relationship values, because the relationships are calculated on 2 values, like and respect. So they're added together and averaged together to be the relationship. And there are certain checks that check for like specifically or respect specifically, but the excursions are based on your overall relationship, and other things are based on the overall relationship. Anyway, I had this graph that I could just, as a debug command, bring up just to see, and I never got rid of it. So after a few days, people were like, "Oh, I really wish that I had like a more of an indication of what the relationship was." And I was like, "Well, I don't want to add the telltale like so and so will remember that, because I find that very immersion breaking." But yeah, I cleaned it up a little bit and made the colors look more consistent with the rest of the UI, and I just patched in the ability to access that in New Game Plus for people who wanted to have more control over that. So yeah.
All right, and again, I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about trying to make things as approachable as possible for people.
I have something to say about approachability. What you were saying is, yeah, I think the main thing is that too, like, you have to be aware that especially for people who have never played an adventure game before, if you put that 9-verb interface in front of them, or even like the Sierra icon interface, without explaining it, it's a completely alien UI to someone. And I feel like a lot of the time people think, "Oh, well, I've been playing adventure games, I understand how they work." But a lot of people don't. So, you have to make it as approachable and as accessible as possible. So, that's why there's a tutorial at the beginning. That's why I tutorialized inventory with, like, you walk into the the newspaper office, and you get asked to see the letter that you were sent. And there's no reason to do that other than just, this is training you how to use the inventory, because this is the first instance of being able to use it. So, yeah. Yeah, you have to take into advantage. You have to tutorialize it as organically as possible, I find. But
yeah. And again, you'll always have people say, well, I don't want to have to solve or open up, learn how to do my inventory for the umpteenth time. But it is very important. I think there's a greater discussion. I know this is something that when we did the roundtable a few years ago that we talked about, was kind of the adventure genre's like relevancy in the mainstream markets. Because as we said at the start, like, there's still people who think that the adventure game genre died with Telltale, that there were never any other adventure games after Telltale went under for the first time. And it's like, as we've been talking about, like, games like Blueprints earlier, like, there are games that break out into the mainstream, and some games it's very easy to tell why, other games it's not. But for the adventure genre, I think it still has been like very much this uphill battle in terms of the mainstream wise. Again, like, for the people watching this, for my audience or my fans watching this, we are very well aware of what adventure games are coming out. I've played a lot of them. I will, as we're recording this, I still have Old Skies to get to, probably in a few days after we're done with this podcast. But bringing this to like people who haven't been following it is a far harder sell. And with the discussion about approachability, it's all the more so, because again, you'll have people who they have never heard of LucasArts. They don't know what Maniac Mansion is, Day of the Tentacle, of course, Grim Fandango. If you try to put one of those interfaces in front of them, they're gone. Like, they're not going to go, okay, why is this an eyeball, a mouth, a magnifying glass, and there's like a few other icons on my screen.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before about, as a designer being stuck between a rock and a hard place, because my main thing is wanting to expand out beyond just the niche of people who grew up playing the classics, because it's like, yeah, those were great games, but they're also like over 30 years old, we have to move forward. So, yeah, it's basically, like you say, there's people who have never heard of these games, or if they have heard of them, they've never played them, but they hear of them and they have this association with, oh, well, these are these kinds of games that have ridiculous puzzles and whatever. And I think that's a shame. I think, I think the adventure game genre is just as valid a medium to tell stories and have meaningful stories, like, as any other genre. Like, people talk about, like, oh, The Last of Us has such a gripping story, and yeah, okay, it has a gripping story, but then the gameplay is like shooting things. Okay, fine. An adventure game can have a gripping story too, and then the gameplay is, smashing items together. But no, in all seriousness, like, yeah, I feel like, obviously, the thing too is that, like, all the most certainly the LucasArts games, with like the exception of Loom and The Dig and a couple of others, like, most were comedies. So people also have that association where it's like, oh, an adventure game, it must be silly and zany and crazy. But I mean, you look at recent examples like Perfect Tides, or like you said, Unavowed, or like more serious games or Rosewater, like, that tell more serious, grounded stories with actual themes that make you think about things. And it's not just, oh, this crazy, silly, funny, jokey game. But it's really hard to be taken seriously as a genre. Like, not to call anyone out, I won't mention the website, but I will say that a fairly well-known website published a review of Rosewater, and they spent the whole review basically saying, oh, well, this is a good game, but it's an adventure game, and boy, adventure games sure are annoying, and blah blah blah. And it was like, okay, well, and then at first I was like, oh man, they didn't like the game. But then reading it over again, it was like, well, no, they didn't say they didn't like the game. They said they actually did like the game, but for some weird reason they framed the article as like, oh, adventure games, huh, to like provoke discussion, which they succeeded, because there's a whole bunch of comments in the comments section of people debating about like if adventure games are valid or not. But it's like, why did you sacrifice my giving my game a good review for your little soapbox on whether adventure games are good or not? So it's unfortunate, but it's like you said, it is an uphill battle. But I don't know. I keep wanting to believe that sometime, somewhere, it'll break through and people will realize that, point and click well, I even hesitate to say point and click adventure games anymore, because again, saying point and click adventure comes with baggage. Like, I would say, narrative adventure games, because then you have quote unquote narrative games like, say, Firewatch or Gone Home or stuff like that, which I guess some people would put more in like walking simulator territory because they don't have puzzles. But you have games like that, or even like a Night in the Woods, right? Games that are lauded for their stories and their characters and stuff. The only thing that separates them from point and click adventure games is that they don't have traditional point and click adventure game puzzles. So it's like, well, if you had a game that had traditional point and click adventure game puzzles, but that weren't use banana on hammer and were just like, use correct tool on correct item, there wouldn't be a difference. And yet there's this sort of, there's still this wall. I want to break through that wall. And I'm sorry, I feel like I've been ranting about this, but I feel very strongly about this. And I'm not saying I have the solution, and I'm not saying that I'm going to be the one to do it, but I really hope that more people start to think about adventure games as a legitimate storytelling medium.
Yep. And again, like, this goes with that roundtable that we did a few years ago, where we were talking about kind of like that challenge of getting more people to check out the genre. And as you said, like, there are people who, the second you say adventure game or point and click, they have, the PTSD moment of trying to play something like Broken Sword. What was it? There's another big series from the 90s. I always keep forgetting the name of it. The one, I think it had like, I think at one point you go to Louisiana, it had to do with voodoo.
Oh, Gabriel Knight.
Gabriel Knight, thank you. Yeah. I did not play Gabriel Knight. I think I own a few of them from GOG, but I did play Broken Sword a few years ago. And again, it's that challenge of how do you appeal to like both the old fans and the burgeoning new market? Because again, this is something that always pops up, especially with the adventure genre. Because as we said, like, there are people who they outright demand that you have those very weird and esoteric puzzles. They want to do a Towers of Hanoi puzzle for the umpteenth time, or the wiring, or another classic, the pipe dream that connect all the pipes. Or my, like, long-time fans are like, this is my kryptonite. The puzzles where you have to adjust things, so every time you just, like, it's like, if you pull over one, C and D will move, and if you pull B, it's A and C. So how you get them all lined up? And my solution is I just keep pulling levers, and somehow I just, like, brute force it out of pure randomness.
Yeah, no, there definitely are people who want those puzzles, to whom I say, well, just go back and play those old games, because you're not going to find it in mine.
And one thing I want to ask you, like, keeping on the topic of puzzle design, there are a few puzzles in Rosewater that kind of have, like, you only have, like, 1 or 2 chances to actually solve them. And this was during, like, one of the vignettes in Chapter 2. I'm thinking of, like, the the river scene and the oil well scene.
Yeah.
And this, again, I think gets at kind of like the challenges of puzzles. Because the solutions to them are very logical. Again, I'm not going to spoil them here when you think about what is you're trying to do. But again, like, if you were talking about this was like a 90s adventure game, we could imagine some, like, outlandish, to help the guy out of the river, the throw acorns on the grounds, and we summon a squirrel, and the squirrel angers a beaver, and the beaver chops down the tree, and it creates a path to it. But you couldn't really do that if you say, "Oh, you only have you only have like three strikes, and the puzzle's a failure." Right. So with again, trying to think about things more organically, did it come easy to you as you were coming up with the puzzles, trying to make things again more grounded compared to the older school versions?
Yeah. I mean, part of the challenge there too was, conveying the danger or the tension of a scene without being unfair. So yeah, the oil well vignette, for example, has a lot of possible outcomes. They don't all end in failure. There's two possible ways to rescue the guy, but it's not on a timer. It's based on actions.
Yeah.
So if you speak to a companion, or if you look at something or search something or leave the room or come back, it's ticking down actions that you do. It's a counter. So you have say 10 turns, so it subtracts a turn, and if you go back down to 0, then the guy falls because you took too long. So yeah, it's basically it's just so that you don't have that ability to just kind of there isn't really any danger here because I have unlimited options. With the river thing, no. I mean, you have to actively try a wrong solution to and you get a second chance. It's not just But yeah, there were some situations like that where I wanted to convey that there was danger. So I did that in several ways. That there's a few scenes with those action turns. There's a few scenes where there's timed dialogues. Of course, there's the option to extend the timers in the accessibility options for people who get choice paralysis. But yeah, I wanted there to be high stakes moments. And even still, even if you fail, again, going back from Lamplight City, it's not oh, you failed, too bad, you have to reload. It's just, oh well, that turned out badly, now you have to live with the consequences, unless you want to reload. But yeah, I guess it's not it's a random vignette, so I don't mind spoiling it too much. But for example, the oil well thing. So the story there is that there's an oil well, there's an oil worker, he falls down, he's hanging upside down by his foot by a rope, and you have to rescue him from falling headfirst into the pit. So if you just talk to him too many times, or you waste too much time walking around or wandering, he just falls in. He lives, and Nadine heals him, but he's just oh, so then you just kind of move on, and oh well, you didn't save him, whatever. You can so Jake and Danny are there, and you can save him one of two ways. You can either have Jake lasso him and have Danny shoot the rope and rescue him that way, or you can have Danny lasso him and have Jake throw a knife that you get from Lola, and that cuts him down and rescues him too. If you get the knife from Lola, you can either toss him the knife, or you can throw the knife at him in an attempt to cut the rope. Both of those don't end well. I'll just say that. So yeah, there was a lot of just different possibilities, because I wanted it to be fun and I wanted it to be amusing, because it's kind of a ridiculous situation if you think about it. But then so then the reward is, if you successfully rescue him, he gives you a letter to deliver, and then if you deliver that letter later in Act 3, you get some extra money. So yeah, that was that was one of those examples of just high stakes situation, because it's a Western, and even though it's been described as cozy and wholesome, I did want to have some elements of danger, and it's the wild frontier, so you're going to encounter some eccentric people and have some dangerous situations.
Yeah, I remember do I really want to do the knife myself? You're saying, no, this is I know where this is going. I've played enough games to know what's going to happen if I try to throw this knife at the guy.
Yeah.
And I guess it's one of the final questions for me. to kind of build what we are just saying, and especially again about trying to onboard players, I wanted to ask you about like with something like Rosewater. Like when I first played, like I didn't really follow too much of the game like outside. I tried to go into it as blindly as possible. So when I first started playing it, I didn't think there were going to be multiple choices. I just thought that there was just going to be one solution to every puzzle, one, correct way for every single like conversation. And then as it opened up, I was like, okay, wait, it is going to be that kind of game. And to bring this back to like getting someone like new into it, like I'm just wondering, like someone who's never played an adventure game, let alone something like with Rosewater, or again, like even someone with the Telltale games, like, is there a way to like let them know that, hey, you don't have to do the first choice, or you don't need to just do exactly what someone tells you?
Right. I mean, I guess the most obvious way is to do like what Telltale did in The Walking Dead and have like the disclaimer as you load it up saying, "Oh, this game changes based on your choices." I guess I probably could have done that, but I don't know. Again, I feel like it breaks immersion. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I guess the way I tried to handle it was just sort of have it come up organically, because like, little subtle ways to tutorialize things, not just like I mentioned the inventory example before, but like the way that I introduced the concept of the time dialogues was the Wild West show. So the first time you encounter it is just choosing whether you want to applaud or cheer or heckle or stay quiet, but you see that there are time dialogues. So I wanted to introduce that in a low stakes situation where it was like, oh, I'm going to have situations where there's time dialogues. Okay. And you plant that seed. So then later on, when it comes up, you're like, oh no, so it's not like throwing you in to give you that extra, like, oh my God, when it's like super high stakes situation. And same thing with the multiple solutions thing. I mean, the first place it really comes up is in that puzzle where you have to get into the theater, and that just comes up in the dialogue. So you have all of these choices, and you see that it says, I'm not doing you any favors. So the way I did that was, basically putting it behind an extra step, if that makes sense. Because like, obviously I didn't want it to be like, I'm not doing you any favors, let me in, and then have her say that and then automatically punch him, because then it's like, whoa, wait, that's not what I wanted to do. So, for the curious player who's like, ooh, I wonder what'll happen if I say this, then it's like, you have that, and then it escalates to, no, I'm not going to do this for you, with the parentheses, punch him out. So then you're like, oh, okay, well, I see that there's this option. So then you start to think, okay, well, what if I do that? What if I do this? And then that hopefully clues you in that there's more than one way to approach things.
And I guess with that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I guess for you, any other topics relating to Rosewater, adventure game design that we haven't touched on? If not, I think we can probably go into like starting to wrap things up.
Yeah, sure. I mean, not really. I mean, I'm glad that Rosewater is out. I'm glad that it's been so well received. And yeah, I feel a huge sense of relief. But it's fun to talk about now, finally, after all these years.
Right, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Again, I don't want to like talk too much about like Act 3, because again, I haven't gone to it yet, and we don't want to be spoiling anything towards it. Right. I guess like in like that respect, and to kind of start to like take us out, again, without going into major details, what was it like coming up with the ending for a game like Rosewater? Again, with the different vignettes, different companion options, and again, like how the story grows. Like, what was it like? I guess trying to conclude the story.
That was, I mean, it wasn't really that difficult, because I mean, obviously, one of the things that I've struggled with in the past is ending stories in a satisfying way. Because I felt that sometimes my endings have been maybe a little too abrupt. I mean, obviously, what you want with an ending is to provide closure and wrap up all the loose ends and stuff. But because of the way I designed it, and I knew that all paths would converge in the end, and there would be one set ending, that left me open to be able to say, okay, well, this is what the ending is going to be. And I actually remember writing down. I put away my notebook already because I'm done with Rosewater, so I can't pull my notebook and say, look, this is what I had. But I remember that excuse me, I remember that I wrote a list of like what I wanted the sequence of the ending scenes to be. So it was like, okay, well, I want this to happen, and then we have to see this, and then we have to see this, and then we have the bit where she writes about what happened to everybody, and then we have this, and then we have the credits. So I planned it out, and then it was pretty easy based on that, because yeah, I mean, yes, you have all of these branches, but like I say, they all come to a similar conclusion in the end, and there's obviously some variety in what happens with everybody, but Harley's story always ends the same way. So yeah, it was that was fairly easy. And then of course, it was like, oh well, how do we make this so that when you finish you feel satisfied and you're left with a smile on your face, which is hopefully what happens. I mean, I certainly think that it does that, but your mileage may vary. But yeah, I wanted to leave the player feeling happy. So as opposed to Lamplight City, where I was like, I wanted to feel bittersweet. But yeah, with Rosewater, I just wanted it to be like, yes, I feel good. I had this great trip, and now it's over, and now I feel a nice sense of cathartic relief.
All right. Oh, I guess like one other quick question. Like this will be, I guess, a little minor spoiler. I know there's like I remember there was the mini game in Act 1 when you're trying to shoot the bottles in front of the fort.
Yeah.
I guess what was it like, again, like keeping with like trying to design like different ways of playing this game, what I guess like was your approach to like having something a little bit more like, I guess, like action focus for a game like Rosewater?
Yeah, that definitely was something I had to consider. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Because it's like a Western, so you're like, oh, well, obviously, is there going to be a shooting mini game? There were two. There were originally two, but I cut one. And I'll tell you that. I'll tell you the reason why, but first let me explain the first one. Yeah, that one actually had this is all stuff I have to write down for the upcoming developer commentary. But the very first time you encounter the shooting is at the beginning. There's someone outside a fort, and you have to beat her at shooting to get her to go away. And she's shooting at, like, her and her friend are shooting at this just like big target on a box. And the puzzle is you have to beat her at shooting, and you have to get some bottles to beat her at shooting. And it's purposely designed to be difficult, but not impossible. I mean, I've gotten the trophies. There's 3 levels of trophies. There's one for doing it on your first try. There's one for doing it without practicing and getting all of them, or like a perfect score. And then there's one. There's one for doing it on your first try. There's one for doing it on your first try and getting all 5 bottles. And there's one for doing it on your first try, getting all 5 bottles and not practicing.
Damn.
So there's bronze, silver, and gold level of trophy for that, or achievement rather. But anyway, it was designed to be purposefully challenging because Harley is not. We never established that Harley's good with a gun. So it doesn't make sense for it to be like super easy for her to be able to just shoot these bottles. And it kind of skirts the line between, wanting to, as a player, wanting to win, but also like being okay not to win, because you only get 3 tries at it. If you fail more than 3 times, she's just like, stop embarrassing yourself, and she doesn't let you do it anymore. At which point you have to ask Danny to help you, which makes sense because Danny's good with guns, so he, you can ask him beforehand. But I wanted it to be like, okay, well, if you win, okay, that's good, but then it also feels good to ask your companion because you're having him help you. So that one was tricky, but I felt like it worked in the end. Now later on, and this isn't too much of a spoiler because it's in the trailer and it's in the Western, but there's a scene at the end of Act 2 where there's a shootout. And originally, there were two ways to get through the shootout. One was getting all of your companions to work together and figuring out how to get across a few screens, and like, because you're getting shot at, so you have to figure out different ways to set it up so that you could get through safely, and then you get something from the wagon, and then that helps you. You could do that, or you could shoot at the people. You could borrow one of Danny's guns and shoot all of the guys that are shooting at you. And that was originally set to be really difficult, and you only got a couple of tries at that. But I cut it because I realized, one, back to what I said before, we never established that Harley was good with a gun. Two, it's very different to shoot bottles versus shooting people. So all of a sudden, Harley is like a murderer, and that's okay, which I didn't want to do. And three, if you did that, it completely like robbed you as the player of the experience of getting to work together with all the companions. So that was one instance where I had a puzzle that originally had two solutions, where I said, no, you have to do it this other way. And I think it works better for it, especially because of what happens afterwards. But that's spoilers, so we won't go into that.
All right.
But yeah, action-wise, there was that, and I mean, a Golden Wake has always made me very wary of putting action sequences in, because a Golden Wake had that infamous air show scene where it was a puzzle because there was logic to how you solved it, but I didn't code it very well, and so a lot of people got frustrated with it because it was on timers, and I don't really like doing that in my adventure games anymore. So.
And with the bottle shooter, I got 4 out of 5 on my first try, and I failed every bottle during the practice too. So practice did nothing for me, but almost maybe did help. I kind of got into the rhythm of things, but at least I got the first trial.
Not bad.
All right. Yeah, I think that is about... Yeah, I do have a few kind of things to go with you, like now that the game is out, kind of to wrap things up. But any other topics from you before we kind of wrap things up for tonight?
Not really.
All right. And for chat, if you have any comments or questions for Francisco, this is officially final last call for them. It's been relatively quiet, although Mark was fun about, there's going to be a lot of Smash watches, and you gave the hint for that secret achievement.
Oh, right. Well, that's fine. It's been out. The game's been out almost a month. Let people get at least one secret now.
All right. So, to start to wrap things up for today, again, like you've been talking about, kind of like you eventually have a little bit of vacation coming up. Have you thought about? And you mentioned, having developers' commentary. Any other update or content that you're going to add to Rosewater in the future?
Aside from the developer commentary, no, I don't think so. There isn't really anything else that I think. I mean, I have a patch in progress right now for a few new bugs that were discovered, but I'll probably put that up next week because our Mac and Linux porter is on vacation this week, so I have to wait for him to come back and do those builds. But yeah, with regards to major updates, the commentary is really the only thing I'm planning on doing, and that'll probably be later this summer, maybe August or so. So yeah, I wanted to kind of take a step away and collect my thoughts and come back to it after release and kind of, offer some post-release perspectives in the commentary as well. I did the same thing with Lamplight City. So, yeah, and also, give an incentive to people to either pick it up for the first time or play it again later this year. Maybe time it close to a sale. We'll see. But yeah, aside from that, I think it's pretty feature complete.
All right. So here's the question again I always like to ask developers. Have you given thought to what your next project is going to be once all the vacationing and relaxing is finally finished?
Yeah, I 100% know what I'm doing next, but again, I don't want to think about at least late August, early September, because what I will say is that it will be a much shorter game, it will be much more linear, and it will not take me another 6 years because I do not have another 6-year project in me. I used to say I don't have another 6-year project in me immediately after this one, but I don't think I have another 6-year project in me at all. Because yeah, if it takes me another 6 years to make a game, I'll be almost 50 by the time it comes out, and I don't want to like have. I don't want to take more than half a decade with every game I make because I only have so many more games in me, and I only have so much time to do them. So not to get morbid or anything, but I'd like to at least get to like 6 games before I get too close to retirement age, right?
All right. So I think with that we can wrap things up. So for I guess the fans, anyone watching, have any like final thoughts or anything you'd like to say to the fans to take us out?
Just thank you. If you enjoyed Rosewater, please leave a review on Steam. They really help. Even if you didn't enjoy it, leave a review. Tell your friends because word of mouth is super important. I feel very lucky that every game I do seems to do better and reach more people than the previous one. But it's always a struggle to get noticed. So yes, I appreciate you having me on because stuff like this helps too get the word out. And yeah, if you like westerns, if you don't like westerns, if you like a game with a good story, I think you'll enjoy Rosewater. I think it's a lot of fun. People seem to think it's a lot of fun. I do want to give a shout out to the amazing voice cast. I didn't gush about the voice cast in this interview for some reason, but it was a really fun opportunity to work with union actors and people who had done games like that I had grown up playing, and that was really cool. And people seem to like the voice acting, so that's good. And yeah. And I guess I'll give a little shout out to Foolish Mortals, which is another adventure game that I'm currently doing the voice direction for and having a lot of fun doing, and that should come out later this year, so keep an eye out for that. And yeah, that's about it. And if you haven't played any of my previous games, go back and play Lamplight City and Starlight and a Golden Wake. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that is going to do it for today. So again, Francisco, thank you so much for coming on, and congratulations on Rosewater being released.
Thank you.
All right. So for everyone watching, we're going to end things here for today's episode. If you're new to the YouTubing stuff, check out the Discord, buy all the copies of my books. I don't have an adventure game book yet, but it will probably come at some point in the future. And again, for the people watching this record, I'll include links to the store pages for Lamplight, Rosewater, and anything else, so be sure to check those out too. And finally, if you are a developer, once again, working on a project, you just want to talk game dev, anything, or everything, please get in touch. I'm always looking for guests for this series. So with that said, everyone, thank you for tuning in, and come back for the other discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And until our next chat, have a great night.